The valley was never meant to be found. Daniel understood that now, standing at the edge of a world untouched by maps, cloaked in fog that carried whispers of something impossibly old. The lost valley breathed like a living thing, exhaling warm air from caverns deep beneath the earth and humming with a low vibration that made his bones feel hollow. The fires he had survived still echoed in his lungs, the claws of the mountain beast still burned across his torn jacket, and the memories of what he saw inside Bigfoot's lair refused to loosen their grip. But none of that compared to what waited for him here. The final war had begun long before Daniel arrived. He could sense it in the way the earth trembled, in the smell of burned soil, in the heavy silence that came just before something enormous moved behind the trees. Bigfoot wasn't alone anymore. The creatures rising from the shadows were nothing like the mountain beasts. They were older, heavier, carrying the weight of an ancient purpose engraved into their bones. Something had awakened them, something intertwined with Bigfoot's origins and the valley's darkest secret. When Daniel stepped into the valley, he wasn't prepared for the sight that greeted him. Enormous stone pillars, carved with symbols he had seen in the lair, towered over him like the ribs of a long-dead god. The ground was scattered with bones, some animal, some unmistakably human. Yet the valley wasn't abandoned. The forest moved with life, as if the trees themselves breathed. And then, from beyond a shroud of mist, he heard it, the familiar, thunderous roar of Bigfoot. But this roar wasn't directed at him. Daniel ducked behind an outcrop just as a massive shadow collided with another. Bigfoot stood in full fury, swinging its powerful arms against a creature rising from the ground, a monstrous, pale-skinned beast with glowing eyes and limbs twisted unnaturally. It shrieked like metal scraping stone. Bigfoot's roar shook the entire valley, and the two titans clashed with enough force to splinter nearby trees. Daniel struggled to believe what he was seeing. These weren't just territorial beasts. This was war. Bigfoot fought not for dominance, but survival. The ancient mechanisms etched into the valley walls, symbols Daniel had tried to sketch back in the lair, clicked into place in his mind. The valley wasn't a home. It was a seal, a barrier, a cage for the things crawling up from beneath the earth. He realized now that Bigfoot was not the monster people feared. It was the guardian keeping something far worse from escaping. But something had broken the seal. Daniel moved deeper into the valley, crouching low as battle raged all around him. The air crackled with tension. Strange lights pulsed from the cliffs, illuminating figures fighting in the shadows. Bigfoot's kin, smaller but equally powerful, emerged from caves and ridges, battling wave after wave of pale, twisted creatures. The earth groaned, splitting open as more horrors clawed their way out, screaming into the night. Every step Daniel took was a descent into the truth. He reached a ridge overlooking the valley floor, and what he saw made him freeze. At the center of the valley stood a massive stone monolith, cracked open by a recent force. Energy bled from it like a living wound, pulsing in rhythm with the creatures rising from below. Symbols identical to those in Bigfoot's lair spiraled around it like a warning. The ancient force the legend spoke of wasn't just real, it was alive, awakening in fury. The connection between Bigfoot and the creatures was undeniable. They shared the same primal energy, the same ancient origins, but something had fractured long ago, splitting the lineage into protectors and destroyers. And now the destroyers wanted out. A sudden burst of movement snapped Daniel from his thoughts. Bigfoot staggered into view, blood darkening its fur, massive chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Another creature lunged at its back. Without thinking, Daniel raised his flare gun and fired. The flare exploded against the creature's shoulder, sending it shrieking and rolling away. Bigfoot turned toward Daniel. For a moment, neither moved. The weight of every encounter they'd had, every chase, every fight, every moment of terror, hung between them. But this time Bigfoot didn't roar. It didn't charge. It simply looked at him with an expression Daniel had never expected, recognition. Whatever lived beneath the valley was a threat to them both. Then the ground split apart beneath their feet. Daniel fell, tumbling through a tunnel of loose roots and collapsing soil. When he hit the bottom, the air was warm and humid. He found himself inside a vast underground chamber glowing with veins of molten red light. And there, rising from the center of the room, was the source of the ancient force. A colossal heart-like structure pulsed inside a cocoon of black stone. The creatures climbing toward the surface were connected to it by tendrils. The monolith above was merely the lock, this was the engine. Daniel realized the truth with horror. Someone or something had begun to break the cocoon open. Not nature, not time, a deliberate force. Footsteps echoed behind him, heavy, slow, but familiar. Bigfoot emerged from the shadows, battered but standing tall. It looked from Daniel to the pulsing cocoon, letting out a guttural sound that carried an unmistakable message. This was the final battle. And it wasn't just Bigfoot's war. It was Daniel's too. The ground shook as the cocoon's stone began to crack, leaking blinding light. Tendrils shot out toward Daniel, but Bigfoot intercepted them, ripping them free with furious strength. The chamber trembled violently. Creatures poured in from the tunnels, swarming Bigfoot in a frenzy. Daniel grabbed a shard of stone from the ground and fought back, slashing at anything that moved. The cocoon cracked again, this time with a sound like the roar of the earth itself. Something within began to rise, far larger than the creatures they had already faced. Daniel knew they couldn't kill it, but they could stop it from ever reaching the surface. The monolith above had acted as a seal. Maybe it could again. Daniel sprinted toward the glowing veins running through the chamber wall. They pulsed like circuits. Symbols lined the stone in a pattern he had seen before. If he could activate them, if he could force the mechanism to collapse. A creature leapt onto his back, claws sinking into his shoulder. He screamed, falling forward. Bigfoot grabbed the creature and hurled it across the chamber, then turned to Daniel. There was no time for fear. No time for doubts. Only the understanding that their survival depended on each other. Daniel placed his hands on the marked stone. Heat surged through his skin. The symbols ignited, one by one, until the entire chamber glowed like molten gold. The valley roared, shaking from the inside out. The cocoon began to collapse. The creatures shrieked in terror as the chamber's walls contracted. Bigfoot let out a roar so powerful it cracked the stone beneath its feet. Daniel felt the ground lift as the mechanism pulled the valley shut from below. Light swallowed everything, then silence. When Daniel opened his eyes, he lay at the mouth of the valley. The fog had lifted. The earth was still. The creatures were gone, and Bigfoot stood at the ridge, watching him. No roar, no chase, a silent acknowledgement. Then, with one final step, Bigfoot disappeared into the forest, leaving Daniel with the truth. The war was over, but the legend had only just begun.